Now on to Taiwan. As you have all seen, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, arrived in Taiwan earlier this morning, East Coast time. As we have said, the Speaker has the right to visit Taiwan. And a Speaker of the House has visited Taiwan before without incident, as have many members of Congress over the years, including this year. Now, this trip was the Speaker's decision, and Congress is an independent branch of government. You all know that. We're obviously monitoring her travel, as we always do for members of Congress, and we've taken all appropriate measures to ensure the safety of her travel throughout the region. Let me be clear. The Speaker's visit is totally consistent with our long-standing One China policy. We've been very clear that nothing has changed about our One China policy, which is guided, of course, by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint U.S. PRC communiques, and the 6 assurances. We've said that we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We've said we do not support Taiwan independence. And we've said, as I said again yesterday, that we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. And we have communicated this directly to the PRC at the highest levels, including in last week's call between President Biden and President Xi. The National Security Advisor, Secretaries of State and Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also made this very clear to Beijing in a half a dozen recent high-level conversations. Now, we've seen a number of announcements from the PRC in just the last several hours that are, unfortunately, right in line with what we had anticipated and what we talked about yesterday. Now, there's no reason, as I said yesterday, for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis, or use it as a pretext to increase aggressiveness and military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait, now or beyond her travel. And again, as I made clear yesterday, before the Speaker's travel was confirmed by her, China has positioned itself to take further steps, and we expect that they will continue to react over a longer-term horizon. I couldn't give you a date certain of what that horizon looks like, but we certainly would expect them to react even beyond her trip, including announcing additional large-scale live-fire exercises. Of course, they've already started doing some of that today. Flying across the median line, we've seen press reports of them doing that today, and using economic coercion. It's exactly in line with the playbook that we anticipated and talked to you about yesterday. The United States will not seek and does not want a crisis. We are prepared to manage what Beijing chooses to do. At the same time, we will not engage in saber rattling. We will continue to operate in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific as we have done for decades. We will continue to support Taiwan, defend a free and open Indo-Pacific, and seek to maintain communication with Beijing. We will keep doing what we are doing, which is supporting cross-strait peace and stability.
John, now that House Speaker is actually in Taiwan, can you give us a sense of President Biden's thoughts on the matter? Does he support that? And then secondly, what kind of lines of communication, if any, are ongoing today between the two governments?
Well, I mean, you have the Speaker of the House that's in Taipei right now. Of course, she's going to be meeting with government leaders. We have stayed in touch with our Taiwan counterparts, of course, and we've stayed in touch with Speaker Pelosi's staff as she has progressed through this trip.
Just to clarify, I meant with Beijing.
I don't have any specific conversations with PRC leaders to speak to today, but we, as you know, we have an ambassador there. We have an embassy. I mean, we are in routine communication with leaders in Beijing. But I refer you to the State Department for anything that they might or might not have communicated.
And then about President Biden, does he?
Look, I said this yesterday. The president, as a former senator, fully respects the right and the prerogative, frankly, the responsibility of members of Congress to include the Speaker of the House to travel overseas.
But that's a different question, or that's a different response. And does he support her going?
He respects the Speaker's decision to travel to Taiwan.
John, was anything you saw today from China's response a surprise? I know that there were the drills and missile tests that Beijing announced that they would conduct. Was that what they've been warning about in private to the White House?
I'm not going to talk about private discussions. What I would tell you is that what we've seen thus far, and she just arrived, is consistent with the playbook that we expected them to run. And we'll just keep watching it. It's one of the reasons why I came out here yesterday to sort of lay some of that out for you. So what we've seen so far, been pretty consistent.
And is the president planning to speak with Speaker Pelosi after she leaves Taiwan, or when she gets back here to get a readout or a sense of that trip?
I don't have any conversations that I could announce or speak to. Obviously, if he does have a conversation like that, I'm sure Kareem would let you know.
When it comes to Taiwan, it appears the retaliation has already begun. China banned exports from 100 Taiwanese brands. Are you concerned that Taiwan is going to end up paying too steep a price for this U.S. visit?
There's no reason for that to happen, Nancy. As we said today and yesterday, no reason for China to take what is a perfectly legitimate and consistent travel by the Speaker of the House and turn it into some pretext for amping up the tensions or creating some sort of crisis or conflict. There's just simply no reason for that. And because she's not acting, we're not acting in any way inconsistent with the way we've been acting now for decades, since the Taiwan Relations Act was passed into law back in the late 70s. I can't speak for Chinese actions or Chinese decisions one way or another. We're going to continue to watch this and monitor this. I would just say that we don't support Taiwan independence. We've said that before. We do support Taiwan's self-defense in keeping with the Taiwan Relations Act. We're going to keep doing that, and we're going to keep working on revitalizing our alliances and partnerships in the region for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
And what is this going to do to the U.S.-China relationship, which is already so fraught?
I think the fact that the president talked to President Xi last week for 2 hours is an indication of how much the president understands and respects the consequential nature of this bilateral relationship. As I've said before, one of the most consequential, not just in the region, but in the world. The president wants to keep those lines of communication open. It is particularly important to do that when there's times of tension like right now, to make sure those lines of communication remain open. So I would say, to answer your question, one, we don't want to see this spiral into any kind of a crisis or conflict. Again, we would say there's no reason to. Number two, we want to be able to maintain those lines of communication. But a lot of this is going to depend. Answering your question is going to depend a lot on how China behaves over coming days and weeks.
Hey, John,
Come back. We'll come to that.
John, given the concerns you were just talking about with China's actions in response to this visit by the Speaker, the heightened tensions, the risks of provocations and the like, does the President believe that the Speaker's trip is a net benefit to U.S. national security interests or not?
Look, the President doesn't typically comment on congressional travel. As I said, he respects her decision to go. And he believes it's perfectly consistent with American policy going back decades and supported by both parties.
But he doesn't. Does he believe it hurts U.S. foreign policy interests in the region?
The President has already seen that Speaker Pelosi has already accomplished some important conversations on this trip with respect to foreign policy, with her stop in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. And then, she's already announced she's moving on to Japan and South Korea, two of our treaty allies in the Pacific. So he welcomes her conversations. He welcomes her contributions to American foreign policy and our foreign policy objectives overseas. But, the trip's not even over yet. So I think we ought to give the Speaker a chance to talk about what she did, what she learned, and what she took away from this trip when she gets back.
What is the U.S. doing to prepare for any further Chinese action, and particularly any military repercussions for Taiwan from China? Are we seeing any force posture changes in the region? and anything else that the U.S. is doing to help Taiwan.
I think you
gird
can
itself.
understand I'm not going to talk about force posture or military movements one way or the other.
Maybe for a different podium.
Yeah, nice try. No, I'm not going to do that. We take our security commitments in the region broadly very, very seriously. We have robust military capability, obviously available to meet those commitments. We're going to watch what happens here as closely as we can. The only thing that I will say, as I said at the top, is that we're going to make sure that Speaker Pelosi's trip, the whole trip, is safe and secure for her.
Thank you. As you mentioned, we're seeing some pretty provocative stuff, unfortunately, from China, whether that's canceling food exports or planned military exercises. I'm wondering, given these developments, does the White House believe that it would have been better that news of Speaker Pelosi's proposed trip had not leaked last month? Would it have been better if this remained secret until she was on the ground?
Look, it's hard to speak to leaks in this town and what effect they. I mean, you're asking me to sort of go back in time and sort of disprove a negative here. Look, the leak was certainly unfortunate. Wherever it came from, it was unfortunate because the speaker, as we have said, Karine has said, and I have said, should be able to talk to her travel in her own terms. And you know, when she landed, she announced she was there.
And then one more very quickly. House Republicans are already moving forward with legislation that they plan on proposing it that would create a sort of lend-lease program for Taiwan. Is this an overreaction? Is this something that perhaps heightens tensions at a moment when they should be mellowed?
I won't speak to Congress and their motivations or whoever, and I'm certainly not going to talk about proposed legislation. I would tell you that it's time to wake up. I would tell you that there's been long-standing bipartisan support since the late 70s for the Taiwan Relations Act, both sides of the aisle, and that remains today. And we take our obligations under that act very seriously, which provides for a way, a method of assisting Taiwan with their self-defense. And so through I can't speculate about where this proposed legislation is going to go, and I'm certainly not going to offer an administration policy statement on it since it's simply proposed. But I can be certain, and it's important for everybody to understand how seriously we take our obligations under that Taiwan Relations Act, and we're going to continue to do that. I mean, even just under President Biden, you know, we've provided $1 billion worth of defense articles under the Taiwan Relations Act. So it's a serious commitment.
And a quick question on the speaker's trip to Taiwan. I mean, I know you're saying everything China has done was largely sort of anticipated, but from all the reactions you have seen so far, are there any that have caused, are cause of concern for this administration?
Look, I think just broadly speaking, it's concerning to see them react in the way they've reacted. There's no need for that. There's no justification to turn this into a crisis. So it's unfortunate that they have already chosen to act in ways we kind of predicted that they would. We would again remind leaders in Beijing that there's nothing unprecedented about this trip. I heard a Chinese spokesman earlier today was saying that it violates their sovereignty. There's no violation of sovereignty. The speaker going is perfectly consistent with other members of Congress going, as I said, including this year. So there's just no reason to amp this up. And we're not going to participate in that. As I said at the outset, we're not going to do saber rattling. We're simply going to do what we have to do to make sure that her trip is safe and secure, and that we can meet our security commitments in the region writ broadly, and also to make sure that we can keep those lines of communication open, because it's important, again, particularly when things are tense.
So how should we interpret that in that case, John? Just a quick follow-up, if I may. How should we interpret in that case, the U.S. U.S. Navy parking warships to the east of Taiwan? How should we interpret, the Chinese warplanes flying over the line, divvying up the Taiwan Strait?
Well, as a former naval officer, I can assure you we do not park warships anywhere, but we deploy them as appropriate. And I'm not going to speak to individual unit movements right now. We have the 7th Fleet is present in the Western Pacific, based in Japan. We have a lot of naval assets in the region, and they're constantly moving around, and they're constantly conducting operations and exercises to include what we call freedom of navigation exercises or operations.
Reaction to what is happening there.
I'm not going to talk about force level movements with respect to this.
James, are you ready?
Oh, my goodness.
Okay.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Admiral, one on Taiwan, if you would, and one on the Middle East very quickly. You keep telling us that U.S. policy hasn't changed and that the United States does not support an independent Taiwan. And yet, if we look at what Speaker Pelosi tweeted from the ground in Taiwan, her post actually states, quote, "America stands with Taiwan." We all know that Taiwan harbors ambitions toward independence. When the Speaker of the House says, "We stand with Taiwan, America stands with Taiwan," how can the Chinese construe that as anything else but that you're supporting independence?
I'll let the Speaker speak for herself. All I can tell you, James, is what I told you yesterday, and I'm happy to repeat it. Nothing has changed about our adherence to the One China policy. Nothing has changed about our stance on Taiwan independence, which is that we do not support Taiwan independence. And nothing has changed, James, about our commitments and how seriously we take those commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act. Everything is consistent, James. I can't say that any more clearly.
So when she says America stands with Taiwan, is she misstating administration policy?
You should talk to Speaker Pelosi about her comments. I'm not going to parse. I'm not saying that, James. I'm not going to speak for Speaker Pelosi. That's beyond my writ. I can speak for the administration when it comes to national security policy, and nothing has changed about our policy.
And secondly, to what extent the Chinese actions last 1 week is impacting peace and stability in the neighborhood?
I'm sorry, can you say that
To
one?
what extent the Chinese actions is impacting the peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region?
Well, it's certainly not helping. These actions that they've taken in just the last hours and days, certainly not helping to increase stability and security. And again, as I said in my opening statement, we're invested in that peace and security and that stability. And we're not going to be saber-rattling, and we're not going to do anything to increase the tensions. We'd like to see the tensions come down. We'd like to see the lines of communication with Beijing stay open. And again, we reiterate, there's no reason, just no justification whatsoever for the tensions to amp up any more than they already are.